So good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start today talking about MedEdPORTAL, publishing, teaching, and learner assessment materials for LMSA. And let's see if there it goes. So these are the objectives for this activity. By the end of the session, you should all be able to describe the principles of educational scholarship, give examples of publications in MedEdPORTAL that highlight the needs of Latin, Hispanic patients and communities, list strategies for framing educational work to improve the publishability of your work.
Great. And just to give you a sense of sort of what we're going to go through in the next, in our time together is I'm going to put a little bit of framing around educational scholarship. And then Dr. Silva will talk about her experience, and then I'll kind of close out a little bit in terms of talking about MedEdPORTAL as a journal and how you can use strategies to sort of think about your work. So I'll first start with this framework, which is Boyer's scholarship framework. And, you know, we are very familiar with the scholarship of discovery, which is sort of what we consider traditionally as original research. But when he created this framework in 1990, he really opened up the minds of, you know, institutions in terms of thinking about all the different ways in which faculty and trainees can contribute to scholarship. And I won't talk about integration and application, only to say that there are ways in which we expand upon what we do in the lab or what we do in, you know, in the clinical setting, but to think about how we work together. But the scholarship of teaching and learning is what's really germane here. And essentially, there are two elements for the scholarship of teaching and learning. It is understanding something that advances the science of teaching and of learning, and something that is peer-reviewed. And if you think about those two elements, some form of study and that it's peer-reviewed, then essentially you have the components of scholarship. So next slide. And this is how it comes down to, you know, where the rubber meets the road as a teacher, because I bet all of you are doing what I would consider good, and in fact, not just good, but excellent teaching. And when we think about excellent teaching, it's purposeful and that it's effective. But I want to challenge you to think about how you can make your teaching scholarly. And how I define scholarly teaching is that it's evidence-based. It's taking what's going on in the world around you and bringing that into your teaching. If you're teaching about a clinical topic or you're teaching about any topic at all, that you're regularly checking the literature to see if it's the most up-to-date. And then something that is innovative is what is scholarly teaching, something that's really kind of touching the boundaries of what we would traditionally consider teaching. So bringing in novel approaches to teaching, novel approaches to assessment. But the final step for your teaching is the potential to achieve the scholarship of teaching and learning. And as I mentioned before, it really incorporates some form of study or investigation and a process of peer review. The reason why the peer review part is so important is, you know, every day I feel like I'm coming up with great ideas, but if that's not what the experts think are great ideas, then it really lacks some meaning. And so the importance of peer review is really checking in on what the world thinks about your work. The next slide. Oh, Dr. Silva, I think I'm having a hard time hearing you, so I don't know if...
I think you're not muted, but the sound isn't coming through for some reason.
Yeah.
Maybe the mic is not on a computer. Not yet. Maybe if you log off and log back on. And in the meantime, maybe Dr. Huang could entertain us with medical education humor? No?
Well, I was going to say, if all the slides I definitely cannot do, well, there are many slides I can't do. This is definitely one of them. So, Dr. Silva, do you want to see if, because sometimes the other thing is maybe the arrow right next to the mute button can change your audio input. because we were hearing you beautifully before.
Mhm.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
No? Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
got
Yes.
it.
I had to take off the.
Oh, now you're lost.
We lost you again.
Oh,
Also, it was really scratchy, so I wasn't sure what that is. Do you want to try calling in? Do we have
Or
a call in?
even logging on and off. There we go. There she goes. And Dr. Huang, how long have you been at MedEdPORTAL?
Oh, great question. Yes, nice filler. I've been editor-in-chief since 2017, and
wow.
I've been with the journal essentially since 2005. So it's come a long way. And I was on the editorial board before, and then an associate editor before becoming editor-in-chief. So
And who got you the first start on that position?
that's a great question. And I love that we're sort of thinking about career development, because I came out of, so Dr. Saldana and I both went to Stanford. We were the same year, I think. And I was an English major. So, let's see.
Dr. Silverback? Let's see.
You hear me now?
There we go.
Yes.
Sorry, let me share the screen really fast.
And we'll get back to that question during our Q&A.
No worries. And Dr. Silva, it is a little bit scratchy what's coming in. So maybe you can start and we can see how it goes.
I will. I am so sorry. Hopefully, if I speak slow, you can hear me or not. Yes?
Yes.
Yes, there's just background crackle. That's so let's see how it goes. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Same.
No.
Same. Lost you again. Just there's something wrong with your
This didn't happen. Sorry. Did you lose me again?
No,
Can you hear
no.
me? Yes? No?
We can hear you. It's a little scratchy still, but we can hear you.
So let's do it this way. I did this morning's workshop without problem. So hopefully you can.
Oh, it's
We
gone.
lost you again. Oh, no.
I'm doing this in my iPhone. Give me a second.
Such a great idea.
I don't know. I'll do it in my iPhone.
Oh, now you're back.
I am back.
Without any interference. So I think it looks good.
It might be the presentation then, the sharing. Every time I share, something is happening.
Let's just leave it there then.
I'll leave it this way.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go like this. There we go. Okay. So I'm a general pediatrician at the University of Puerto Rico, like I said, and I do pediatric hospital medicine. And at the beginning of my career, I was first a course director, and then I went through clinical skills program director. I started getting involved in academic medicine, medical education, getting trained to teach and assess. But through all of these positions, general pediatric section chair, the curriculum office director, faculty development office director, I was an associate dean for academic affairs, accreditation office director, and I did very little publishing. Very little publishing. I did not have time. I did not have the resources or the support. And I've been a LCNE site team member for 7 years now. And it was still something that I saw as extra that I couldn't bring together in my head. So getting involved with scholarship for me has been very important. And you'll see in a later slide that one of the important points I want to make is that it's never too late. I'm 50 years old. I've been 20 years a professor in different levels. And I just got started maybe 3 years ago, really. And it was MedEdPORTAL that opened the probability for me to align my career mission, which has always been better education translates into the better health of my population, and my goals with publishing. So you have to make it work. You have to make your work, your teaching, your leadership count twice. And these are really Dr. Huang's main idea. It all started with her. She gave a presentation with JP at the Universidad Central del Caribe, one of the Marco schools here in Puerto Rico. And I saw them and I heard what they were saying. And Dr. Huang not only told us how to publish in MedEdPORTAL, but also other tips to publish in other journals. And I thought sitting there, it's never too late. Maybe I can do this. Maybe I can have all this, so much work, a lot of work, so little help, I guess, because in the University of Puerto Rico, there are grants and there is research, but no educational research. We do not have the resources for that. So I kind of always felt alone. And they opened this door that I was not really alone. Maybe my collaborations were outside of my school. So MedEdPORTAL have been amazing because I've been able to build a niche. So I was able to align what I believe is education and what I believe is the health of Puerto Ricans here in Puerto Rico and take it outside to medical Spanish and how to be able to teach others how to improve the health of the Puerto Rican patients in the mainland US. So that was the idea and how it goes line in line with what I do. I was very fearful. I was very uncertain. And I really, really thought I was not going to be able to do it, seriously. So, and that's where mentors come in. I was listening to the chancellors in the last meeting, and I was thinking that is so important. So JP, Dr. Sanchez has been my mentor through all this process. And every time I told him, I can't do this, he would say, no, you are going to do it. Right. And I was like, oh my God, okay, let's do this. And it has been very eye-opening and I love learning new things. I think that one of the important aspects of going through your career is learning, being open to new things and getting mentors. So mentorship is incredibly important. So what impact has publishing in MedEdPORTAL has had for me? The first is empowerment and confidence. So now I know I can do it. And it will make a difference. Sometimes you think about publishing when research is not your major area, when you're more in an administrative or a clinical area as extra, and you think it as a checklist. I need this to be able to, for promotion, for example. I published twice in 18 years because it was necessary for promotion. Just to give you an example, lots of other scholarship, but not specifically publishing. So it gave me confidence and it empowered me. It gave me a template for my next publication, and all the ideas are coming in because it is a repository of educational material. And when you're a teacher, that's exactly what you're looking for. And if you do evidence-based medical education, then before you start teaching, you do the research to see what others are doing. So it has given us a template, and I mean us because it's not just me now, my school is getting involved. We're thinking about doing a self-directed learning module following the LCME guidelines. And we're thinking about teaching and assessment, but more for the medical Spanish curriculum. It has provided dissemination around the world, not just in the US. I was invited to speak at the National Hispanic Heritage Month in the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, but also in the International Nursing Association. I've been invited twice. I wasn't able to go this because I think it's today. Actually, it was conflicting, so I wasn't able to do it twice. And build a new reputation because now you get exposed and people start knowing you. They know that you can collaborate with them, new collaborations. And finally, new national roles. So I was invited by MedEdPORTAL to be a faculty mentor, and I'm taking the trainings right now, trying to spread the skills, the knowledge to junior faculty. And I should say, Dr. Huang, not only in my school, one of my ex-students and ex-faculty, years, I'm her mentor. She's in a new school, medical school, and she just approached me to do something together. So that's exciting. That's very good. And this is a snapshot of my first publication, Taking Care of the Puerto Rican Patient, Historical Perspectives, Health Status and Healthcare Access. and how it started. It actually started with a call from JP. He said, so you said you wanted to do this, and I think you might want to present in Hispanic Heritage Month. How do you feel about doing something about Puerto Rican patients? He knew that was my area. And I said, I love that. I will do that. I will do a model of how to better take care of the Puerto Rican patients. There's a lot about Hispanics encompassing us all, but not specific for Puerto Ricans. And we are the second largest group. So it started with a call. And at the end, right, it ended with a presentation at 7 medical schools in New York that wanted to collaborate with this project and get it to publishing. And what was the process? So the first part and most important part is that since it is an educational project, you have to start where you start when you're going to teach something. With the end, what are the objectives? What do you want your students or residents or faculty to be able to do, to be able to learn skills, knowledge, attitudes? And then you have to align. And for me, this was not easy because the idea was given. So I had to develop my objectives, think very carefully, what really do I want? All the trainees that are going to be there, and they're going to be students not only from the School of Medicine, from other schools of health professions, and there's going to be faculty, and there's going to be, so what I want them to learn. So the first part was very focused. The evaluation method has to be very aligned. And we had a student working with us, and she had done the evaluation method. So I didn't want to change it all. So I had to align the objectives to what she was giving us, and then search for similar publications. We did that. There were none. So that was a plus for us because totally new topic and what we were going to do. Develop the teaching module. Again, at least I had to think really, really careful. When I think about teaching pediatrics and when I think about teaching the healthcare for Puerto Rican patients, I want to teach for 3 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. But really, everybody wants like shorter amount of times, more focus. So I spent a lot of time developing the teaching module. And then,
Sitting what, baby?
and then I think, is there a question? I'm
No.
sorry. And then we implemented the module at the 7 schools.
Oh.
They all wanted to collaborate. And it was amazing because they not only
It's
collaborated.
okay, baby. He can eat it there. Do you want him to eat it outside? Okay, I'll bring him.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
They
if we
all
could
went-
ask folks to mute themselves, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
They all wanted to collaborate not only during the process and the teaching and the assessment, but for writing. That's important. Collaboration for writing, bringing it all home. And then we had to work for the submission. So at the end, it is research and it has to be thorough. And then you have to sit down, the educational report, the ESR, which is kind of like the manuscript, I guess is the best way to put it. And I know Dr. Huang is going to expand more on that. It has to be well written. And you have to write. We had to do the faculty guide, the complete faculty guide. And the idea behind it is that I have a thought, I have a way of teaching, right? But then that faculty guide had to help somebody else get my module and teach it and be able to, get the same results and the same methods. And also the case discussion guide, because the methodology that I chose was to discuss some cases. So that was like the process, and it was intense, but it was fun. And I know that sometimes, you think about doing something outside the box as just work. For me, it was an incredible learning experience going from point one to the end and having it published, right? At the end, it was published. Of course, they gave us recommendations. We made the changes. We understood and we got it published. Now, totally different experience with my second publication. So this one, Office of Medical Education Opportunities for Trainees to Engage and Lead in Curricular Innovation and Reform. This one was a curriculum that was already established. There were already objectives and an evaluation method. And JP called me on the phone and said, Deb, we have a leadership workshop and it is structured and it is going to happen. And we need someone to write the Office of Medical Education module with the idea of trainees learning about what we do in academic medicine. This was for BenGap, right? I could not say no because at the time I was the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs. So I was like, yes, I'll say yes right now. It got me, it was more collaborative in the sense that there were already a template, but I had to adjust everything. And I wrote the module, but somebody else, 3 other faculty members were the ones that implemented the module. So they had to get the faculty guide, implement the module, give us feedback. And I sat down, write it all. And then everybody, all of the group actually provided feedback and modifications, and it also got published. Dr. Juan?
Great. So I'm going to go back to the story I started, but then I definitely want to go back and reflect on what Dr. Silva has said. So as I mentioned, I'm a hospitalist, and I started the beginning of my career in medical education and knowing that that's what I wanted to work on. And I've done a bunch of random things. If you've ever gotten the impression that people have very linear careers, it's definitely not true. Ask any one of us that we've had much more zigging and zagging than we've had a direct line to what we are now. So I did some computer-based stuff and educational technology and learned some skills. And I started out with medical student work and education, became an associate program director in residency for our internal medicine program. And I really found my love in faculty development. And it wasn't that long ago, it's probably like 7 years ago, that I found out that I really wanted to focus on faculty development. Career development is still really my passion. So it's expanded beyond educators and really encompasses majority time clinicians as well as researchers. And only recently have I found my way into faculty affairs. But I would say the theme throughout my career in the past 20 years is essentially my love of writing and peer review and words and all of those things. I was mentioning, so even before I became a pre-med, I was an English major. And so for me, doing a biology major was just kind of what I needed to do, but what I wanted to do was to write. And that is also not to say that you have to be an English major in order to write and to publish, but it does speak to how much I've enjoyed writing. And so the first thing that I did was peer review. So I practiced essentially that second criterion for scholarship of teaching and learning by critiquing other people's work. Now, my family would definitely say, yes, she's the critic in the family. But the fact is, it's a lot easier to look at other people's work and to figure out what needs to be improved than it is to really write well and incorporate all of that. So for me, it was easier just to see what other people's relatively unpolished work looked like before I delved into publishing on my own. And as a peer reviewer, that led to associate editor roles in a number of different places, editorial board positions, and then editor-in-chief of MedEdPORTAL, where I am now. And I continue to make writing such a huge part of my career and my life. And essentially what I see is that whether it's an email or a document that you're putting together, or even how you review the literature, language is such an important part of what we do in our day-to-day lives. So the next slide actually ties back to what Dr. Silva was saying about how she got where she was. So, Dr. Silva, you have the perfect story, right? One thing led to a million other things: collaboration, a publication, national talks, national positions. You couldn't tell a better story about it. And, even if you're in your career as a trainee, and it feels like this kind of thing can't happen, I can give you so many examples where that first publication effort led to all of these different opportunities. And it's certainly not to say that it is easy, not at all. I was just a couple of hours ago, I was working on a revision for our journal, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is so hard. So I think writing is hard, putting your passion into words is hard, implementing is hard. All of those things are hard, but the reward at the end it's so gratifying. So I've given here some examples of teaching activities that you might think of as making it count twice. I mean, Dr. Silva has made it count 2, 3, 4 times. But even just taking the first step to making it count twice is how we start. So it may be that you're giving annual lectures and to some learner group on a regular basis. I ask you to recall what I said about making sure that it's scholarly teaching and not just good teaching. So in that way, you want to take what's going on around in the world and make sure that it's really manifested in your teaching. Now, a lecture can become a clinical review or a book chapter. Keep in mind, book chapters are generally not peer-reviewed, so they may not be viewed as traditional scholarship, but it is a form of scholarship in general. And this is just a way to take what you're doing in your regular clinical settings and spreading it out to the world. A workshop, this is a prime example of what Dr. Silva has done, is she took a local workshop and then she had the opportunity to publish about it and to give that workshop in other settings. And then it would lead to other other opportunities, publications and positions. When I think about the kind of workshops that we give regularly, either for faculty development or for administrators, there's nothing to say that you can't suggest that as a workshop on a national level. So this is something that I encourage my mentees to do is, wow, you gave just a great faculty development workshop on that topic. Why don't you try submitting it to your professional society? And oftentimes you'll learn from your local experience and make it better when you pitch it as a national workshop. And then I would say a lot of times when we're thinking about these digestible modules, whether they're online or videos or curricula in general, there are professional societies or organizations that would love to post those on their website. And again, this just reinforces the arc of what feels like a very local activity and can go national and can be spread to many different people. I think the same ideas are true if you're experimenting in medical education, whether it's trying a new novel teaching method, then you can describe it. There's so many innovation report type manuscripts across the medical education journals, not just MedEdPORTAL. And those are avenues for publishing these neat ideas. Or you could potentially turn it into a pilot study and think about brief research reports in medical education journals as a place to publish this. So the next slide, and you can go on to the next slide, Dr. Silva. So a little bit about MedEdPORTAL. I'm not going to make any assumptions that just because you're here that you know everything about MedEdPORTAL. In fact, I'm still learning a lot about MedEdPORTAL myself, including its history. So just a couple of words about it. It is created by the Association of American Medical Colleges. It is online only and open access. And the publications in it since 2018 are Medline Index. So you can find it by searching on PubMed. Prior to that, you'll find it on our website, but it is not found in Medline. And our scope is that what we do is not just publish medical education projects and programs and curricula, but we publish the resources themselves. And so you heard from Dr. Silva why it was really important for her to gather all the materials that she needed in order to implement the work. So a submission usually is associated not just with the manuscript, but all the stuff, whether it's the workshop materials or the handouts or the slide set with the talking points. All of those things need to be packaged in order to submit to MedEdPORTAL. I think another thing to keep in mind is that generally when you publish in another journal, you're actually giving up copyright to your words, to your figures, and to your tables. This is not true of MedEdPORTAL because the focus is on dissemination of your great work to other people so that they can use it. You actually keep copyright. So you're not giving over anything other than an unrestricted license to use those materials. The next slide talks about all those advantages that I just mentioned about MedEdPORTAL. The flip side is there's some disadvantages to it or, challenges in the process. And as I mentioned, writing and publishing are not easy at all. So I definitely don't want to give anybody an impression that it's very, very straightforward. because I mentioned it's open access and Medline indexed, it is aligned with ICMJE, stands for the International Council for Medical Journal Editors. And they set out standards for the kind of work that can be published and how you write it out in a manuscript. And all of those standards have to be followed. I will give you an outline for how to approach a manuscript a little bit later, but that is something to keep in mind, is that there are structures and standards to stick with. The second thing is that I think a lot of you are doing fantastic teaching ideas and assessment ideas, but they do have to have been implemented and evaluated. So it's not just enough to have had a workshop, but you have to collect some data that shows the effectiveness of that workshop. For a lot of people, it's a post-activity only workshop survey. So keep that in mind, that the level of evidence that you need does not have to change patients' lives. But if you collect some data in a survey, that can be submitted as some form of evaluation. That goes back to the point that in the scholarship of teaching and learning, there has to be some form of investigation or study. The third point is that because you're submitting all the materials that are needed to implement that work for other people to use it, those materials have to be packageable. So a good example of something that couldn't really be published in MedEdPORTAL is a new elective, right? So if you think about a new medical student elective, you can't submit those expert, wonderful clinicians around the students. And a lot of the work of setting up an elective is very specific to your institution. So this is where those materials really have to be packageable and generalizable to other settings. And then lastly, I mentioned that because you keep the copyright, you actually have to own the copyright. And this is one thing that people struggle with a lot, is that they'll submit slide sets that have lots of Google images or videos that somebody else has produced. And those things, unfortunately, render a submission to MedEdPORTAL ineligible because it's no longer original work. No. The next slide talks about, I want to give you an example of some kind of bread and butter submissions to MedEdPORTAL, maybe to trigger some ideas about what you're doing right now that might be submittable. So workshops are really what we tend to see because they're reasonable in size. And by that, I might mean, something that is a one-time workshop that's 90 minutes or, 120 minutes or even 60 minutes. Secondly, we really don't publish lectures. A lot of people, for instance, have congestive heart failure lectures, and those are not particularly unique, and they tend to be very passive. So to make sure that we're publishing the kind of work that people can't create from scratch easily, we publish things that have active learning elements and workshops. And that was true of Dr. Silva's work, is that there were a lot of interactive elements to it. And then the second thing, here are just some other examples, like simulation cases, using standardized patients or the high fidelity mannequins. Those are great submissions to MedEdPORTAL because we have templates. You can sort of fill them out. It helps you frame the work as scholarly. And, in general, anything that's an SP case or a sim case is very scripted. So remember, I talked about something that is packageable or generalizable. Those type of cases are very facilitated, are easily facilitated as submissions. And then lastly, modules. So any kind of concrete, discrete teaching element that can be packaged and disseminated works. So and I'm going to take a moment to address Dr. Macias's question around packaging an elective. Now, it's definitely true, like every sub-I or sub-internship in medicine is generalizable. The issue is two things. One is, how does one take those elements that really make the essence of the elective and package that? And that's hard because much of the experience is really clinical, at the clinical interface, and meeting certain patients and maybe hearing lectures from very particular people. So that's the challenge, I would say. But the second piece is originality. So, every single hospital has a sub-internship rotation in medicine, or many of them. And because that's the case, it really isn't something that adds to the literature compared to something that might be an elective in a very particular topic that people have not, in transgender health, for instance, there are not that many rotations in transgender health. And so that might be a more unique experience. Things that I think I've touched on a little bit of this is things that tend not to do well in the MedEdPORTAL submission process include lectures. As I mentioned, they tend to be quote unquote a dime a dozen, lots of them. They tend to be passive. And so publishing something that is essentially a slide set is not seen as a true contribution to the literature. And then again, the uniqueness is usually it's hard to address that. Assessment tools is another category of MedEdPORTAL submissions, and we accept assessment tools all the time, but I will say they are much harder in terms of the work. I would definitely not suggest that as your first one because they do involve needing validity evidence, and validation of these tools is just a tricky science in general. And then lastly, longitudinal courses. So my classic example is having been approached by a medical school wanting to publish their 18-month curriculum on medical humanities in MedEdPORTAL. MedEdPORTAL is a journal just like any other place. And so there's no way that we can start to distill down that huge a course into something that could be easily disseminated and more importantly used. Very few people have a school that has 18 months open for them to incorporate all of that. So you do want to think about, okay, is this a work that requires so many materials to run that it wouldn't be reasonable to submit it to MedEdPORTAL? And I think on the flip side, you also want to submit something that people would actually read. And that is not true of submissions that tend to be excessively long. Some of these reasons for rejection are specific to MedEdPORTAL. And then just to keep in mind, our next slides after that are focused on concepts that will hopefully be generalizable to other medical education journals. But as I mentioned, if it's already disseminated out there, and the example I give are YouTube videos or other things that have been posted on national society websites, then there really isn't a purpose in publishing it in a journal because for one thing, it's not truly original to the journal. And secondly, it's already out there. So it's clearly already disseminated. Low sample size is something that haunts anybody trying to do evaluation in medical education. Certainly we do not require hundreds and thousands of people to be undergoing your teaching activity, but something that is in the single digits will be very, very hard to publish anywhere, but definitely in MedEdPORTAL. I mentioned that you want to think about the spectrum of something that is a process description versus content. And we favor much more on the content side. Remember that our journal is trying to publish the kind of materials that are not easy to create from scratch and that help people replicate that work elsewhere. If it's simply a description, then that is something that probably goes better in another medical education journal. So a good example is, let's say you have a framework for communication skills that, involves an index card with some things on it or, just a framework. That's more focused on the process and less so on content that is really coveted. And I think the elective and other types of institutionally situated activities fall into this category. And then lastly, excessive reliance. So the essence of the material has to be original. So we really don't publish journal clubs, for instance, that rely on very specific set of articles. Podcasts also tend to be already disseminated and passive in general, and then also external. I want to shift now to start thinking about how to prepare for MedEdPORTAL submission. And I frame this actually in a way that I hope will be applicable to you as you do any kind of work trying to get things published. So I don't want this only to be about what you learn about MedEdPORTAL, but also about structuring your work for publishing elsewhere. So, I mentioned that the manuscript in MedEdPORTAL is one element, and that's where the scholarly writing aspects really show up. Ours is called the Educational Summary Report, but it's essentially a manuscript. And then it is, maybe if you can go to the next slide, The one thing that we have that we call out as different compared to other manuscripts which have intro, methods, results, and discussion is we have a dedicated section for educational objectives. And, you may have heard the usual mantra about objectives, but they must be SMART and they are specific, measurable, etc. This is, I think, something that everybody struggles with, no matter how long you've been in medical education, is how do I write objectives that are measurable and very specific? So I thought I would do one exercise. The next slide. So I'd start, and please feel free either to unmute yourself and speak, or you can use the chat as well. I've put a bunch of verbs up here that are often the beginning of objectives, and I'm curious if y'all can share which of these objectives are SMART. Calculate, good, that's a great example. Others? Identify, excellent. And please keep filling out the chat. Y'all have gotten it right on target. The idea is that you want to choose something that is easily measurable. Now, I would say that the trouble with recognized as an objective is it's a little bit fuzzier and more challenging to measure. Compare, that's another great example. And the general idea, and Dr. Silva alluded to this as well, is that when you write good objectives, it tells you exactly how you're going to teach it, and then it tells you how you're going to evaluate it. So let's take the first example of calculate as an objective. If my objective is to help you calculate, risk scores for some particular disease, then one of the activities in the teaching experience should be a calculation. And then lastly, one form of evaluation might be some kind of short answer test where you're required to calculate something. So that's a nice example of how choosing the right verb points the vector at how you should teach it and how you should evaluate it. The next slide, I think, just shows some of my examples of what I felt like were the most measurable objectives. So great. Great. And then the next slide, we're going to start with the intro, and we'll probably spend the most time on the intro and then kind of gloss over the next sections. The reason for this is that the intro, in my mind, and certainly as an editor who's seeing all of these manuscripts cross my desk, is that it's your first chance to really hook the reader. And so when you have a well-organized, passionate and compelling intro, then it gets you right off the start. And if I remember correctly, Dr. Silva's intro was just like that. It was so beautifully written, very structured, and extremely compelling. So the next slide kind of looks at what the structure should be. Now, this borrows a little bit from one of my favorite writers, who is Lorelei Lingard. There's a reference down at the bottom, and Lorelei Lingard has written a series of articles that talk about how you would write an intro. How do you write a discussion? I find them to be incredibly practical articles for writing. What she does is she suggests a structure called problem, gap, and hook. She uses hook, and I've actually changed that to purpose because it's a little bit simpler. But essentially that any intro should have these three elements of it. And if you distill it down, this means that your intro does not need to have more than 3 paragraphs. So problem would be a definition of what is the actual problem you're trying to solve. For some people, it's clinical when you're submitting to MedEdPORTAL. Maybe it's a topic you want to teach about, or sometimes it's an educational problem like well-being. And then the next paragraph should really be dedicated to the gap. Now, some misconception often is that the gap sounds like the problem, but here it's really the gap in the literature. The fact is that there are lots of problems that we're trying to solve in medical education. However, many of those problems have publications associated with them. And so here's your chance to say, what's the gap in the literature that I'm trying to fill by doing this work? This is definitely where a lot of people struggle, is they will try to publish something like, resident as teacher. Now, teaching residents how to be better teachers, I don't know that we've solved it, but it is extremely common, to the point that the ACG requires residency programs to have some kind of resident as teacher curriculum. And so it's very hard to publish that in the literature, including in MedEdPORTAL. So make sure you have a good understanding of the literature and that you can really depict what the gap in the literature is that you're trying to form. And then lastly, the purpose of the work. So if you use this structure to think about your intro, then you're already 1/4 of the way through the manuscript. The next slide is the methods. And this is where I'm not going to go too deeply because it's very, very specific to whatever activity you're trying to publish. But on the next slide, I show kind of how you should anchor your thinking about it, is your usual who, what, where, how type of questions. Now, a journal like MedEdPORTAL, which is publishing work that is intended to be implemented again, is going to get more granular than if you're submitting methods to another kind of journal. It's more like dialing up the details compared to other journals. But you just want to keep in mind these elements. Who's undergoing this activity? Who's running it? What kind of content do you have? Where did it occur? And how did you do it? So if you have these elements covered, then you're essentially giving your readers a recipe for how to carry out that work. And then I'm going to skip over the results, mainly because results sections are pretty, again, very, very specific to methods. And then I'll talk about the discussion. I was taught on my first paper, which, believe me, was so challenging, this 5-paragraph formula to the discussion. And that's the next slide. So it starts with a summary statement. And that first paragraph tends to be pretty short, very high level. I kind of think about it as your public relations release is, I taught this and I learned that, something like that. So it remains very high level. The second paragraph, and there might be multiple versions of the second paragraph, are thinking about your findings and expanding on why you found what you did. This is where some people will just simply repeat what they found, and that's not what the discussion is for. The results are for showing what you found, but the discussion should be, we found this and we think it's that because of this, and that's where you can elaborate on it. My trick is for a lot of the papers I write nowadays, I choose 3 findings that I want to focus on and write a short paragraph for each one of those things. The third paragraph is about what you learned from implementing. It's kind of like lessons learned from the activity. And so for MedEdPORTAL, it might be, we started out with the idea of 5 people for a group, but we found that the discussion was more robust when there were fewer people. Or the way this was designed, we started with a relatively passive activity, but we learned later that they would be allowed to practice their skills if we had tried something that was a small group activity. So that's where you get to say, I didn't have a perfect activity, and this is what I learned from it. So that would be generally your paragraph 3. Paragraph 4 should be seen in any manuscript, and it's essentially the limitations of the work. You do want to reflect on the limitations of your evaluation approach. As I mentioned, many people have surveys, and so they're asking questions like, to what extent did this activity meet this objective? And that's fine, and that's very important. It's a great example of how your evaluation ties back to your objectives. But it's not the same thing as changing behavior or saving people's lives. And those are the kind of things that you want to call out in your limitations section, which is our evaluation was limited only to self-report or to knowledge. And then lastly, implications of your work. You don't want to end with what you did. You want to talk about what I learned in advancing the science of teaching and learning has implications on policy or how people should think about this instructional method or about this kind of curriculum. So think about expanding it out. Something that's often been used as a scaffold for thinking about a manuscript that has an intro, methods, results, and discussion is the hourglass shape. So if you remember when I talked about the intro, it really starts with that broad-based problem that you're trying to solve. It gets very specific, so it narrows in to your methods and to your results. And then in the discussion, even as you're reflecting on your activity, you're branching back out to think about the implications of your work in the larger world around us. And then now it's back to Dr. Silva.
Here we go. So I think that one of the important lessons that I've learned through all this process of writing and collaborating, it's the collaboration part. For me, the prior experience in MedEdPORTAL is helping me go forward and do more, but collaboration is key. It's so important. You can divide and conquer. And it all starts with good objectives. I believe that with all my heart. When you know where you're going and everybody can go in the same line, that you can divide and you can conquer. And you need a platform: Google Forms, Teams, Dropbox. We use Dropbox. We tried Google Forms for one of those, but it helps. It helps that we can all write in the same document and you can see what all of us are thinking. And if I can say one thing about what MedEdPORTAL opened a door, was actually collaboration. And I think in medicine, especially in medical education, we need more of that. We need to not only live in silos, but go outside and see if we can, many of us can implement the same teaching method and see what happens. So that for me was the most important ganancia that I had from this process. And you have to start with what you're passionate about. Now, you really do. So it's not a check mark anymore. Look for a topic that you're passionate about. And if you're unsure, then ask a colleague, ask a mentor. In my case, JP knew what I was passionate about. He gave me the topic and he was right on point. I was like, yes, if I can do it in Puerto Rico, I can do it outside of Puerto Rico. I'll use the same topic and just expand. Think big, don't think small. Think big. So for me, it was the health of Puerto Ricans in the mainland, right? So because that way you're thinking about bigger impact. And please take care of your own work from beginning to end. I know that my second publication was different, but it was so much harder, so much harder. The first one was a lot of more work, but it wasn't so hard on me because I was able to get it from beginning to end. And be willing to learn new skills, a lot of new skills, and fail. It's okay. Sometimes they'll tell you, no, this is not acceptable, and you need to write all of this again. And that is okay. We all learn from that process. And match. Always match what you believe in, what you're working, what are your mission and goals with your scholarship, and you will have a lot more opportunity to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you to Dr. Silva and Dr. Huang. A little round of applause for a great presentation. And we are happy to open it up for questions. I think we have about, actually, if JP, are you still on the line as far as our timeline? My schedule here, but feel free to raise your hand.
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
5
We have like
minutes?
4 minutes.
Great.
Yes, I was looking it up those.
Super. Questions in the chat or Dr. Arriaga?
Dr. Huang, thank you so much. And Dr. Silva, thank you so much for such an amazing presentation. And as well, thank you for presenting it as part of this LIDERS conference. I remember, Dr. Huang, you giving the presentation for I'm an anesthesiologist at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. I remember you giving a presentation for the Society for Education in Anesthesia. And it's great to, that's such a big platform to be able to have this kind of microphone. But with 4 minutes left, I'll get to the question. You had mentioned must have been implemented and evaluated. I have an educational role in my department, and a lot of residents and even students come to me when I hear the words implemented and evaluated. The scientist in me thinks of the letters IRB. To what extent does that process need to be part of what you define as implemented and evaluated for your journal?
Oh, that's an outstanding question, and really the stickler for so many people. I have come, having learned a lot of lessons dealing with the IRB and trying to avoid them, that it's just better when, in general, when you're collecting data to get an IRB. Now, institutions definitely vary. There are some institutions that have such an umbrella practice for IRB that anything that is considered a standard educational practice is covered. In many other institutions, whenever you're collecting data from human beings, that you have to get an IRB. I will say we don't police it as a journal. We do ask you to sign off on a statement about whether this was considered human subjects research by your institution or whether you got IRB. But so we are, I think, honoring essentially what institutional practices are. In general, what I've learned is, and I had put together a multi-year project once and it couldn't get published because I never got an IRB. It was a national survey. So I've learned to involve them much earlier than I have later. So, but an excellent question.
Thank you.
Maybe time for one more question. A quick question, maybe a plug, Dr. Huang, at MedEdPORTAL, there is a specific section for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And that's, I'm revealing my favoritism here, but it's some of the most powerful publications that we have. We have a collection with Dr. Sanchez runs, and then we also have a specific anti-racism section collection as well. And that would be a great place to look for just getting some ideas about what you're already doing and already teaching.
Very good. Well, with that, thank you again to both of you for making this a wonderful workshop and a wonderful component of the conference. And thanks to all of you for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. The next session will be on your Zoom, the room that you're in right now. And that will be moderated by Dr. Figueroa with our co-presenters, Dr. Bentoncourt and Dr. Cora Bramble. So stay tuned, 5 more minutes, and then we'll get started. And I think if it wasn't mentioned, everyone should be submitting their MedEdPORTAL submission in the next month. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes across my desk.